I'm Alan Van Capelle, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the latest edition of Inside Track. Now, most of you don't know me yet, but I hope that over the next couple of days and months and years, we will get to know each other very well. Last August, I was named Executive Director of Friends of the Highline, and today marks my 5th week on the job. To follow in the footsteps of our founders, Robbie and Josh, is humbling, it's daunting, and it's also exhilarating. All three of us are very different from each other, but we all have one thing in common, that we love the Highline and the unique space it occupies in the zeitgeist of our city. At a time when our nation and our world seems more polarized than ever, I take great comfort in knowing that the Highline exists as a connector of communities and of people. It is a place where you can hear almost every language spoken. And it's also a place where the well-to-do, the middle-income and low-income New Yorkers of all backgrounds can gather together and feel like they belong, because they do. The Highline has not just become a premier destination for world-class horticulture, but also world-class art as well. And it's home for architecture that inspires. And it's a place that shies away from the parochial and leans in to the avant-garde. Our very existence is due to the power of collective action, and that has everything to do with you. So if you haven't guessed it yet, I am also in awe of all of you who made this park a reality. Now, when I arrived a few weeks ago, I had a lot of questions about what was coming up in 2023, and that is how this idea for Inside Track came to be. So together, for the next few minutes, we will hear from the incredible team that makes magic every day, and we're going to peer behind the curtain to see what we all have to look forward to this 2023 season. And if you have any questions about what you're hearing, just drop them in the chat, and at the end of this evening's broadcast, we will try to answer some of those questions. But let's get to work. First, I would like to introduce to you Cecilia Alemani, the Donald Mullen Jr. Director and Chief Curator of Highline Art. I see her right there. Hi. And also Melanie Kress, the Curator of Highline Art. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. We're so excited to be here. Welcome.
Thank you so much. And I'm excited to be with you too. Now, I got to tell you, I want to start off from the very first thing, because I know my kids are watching and they love the plinth. They absolutely love it. And they notice that nothing's up there right now. So the number one question I got at home this morning was, what is happening with the plinth? What's coming next? Tell us all about it.
Of course, I'm very excited to tell you more about the plinth, which is our very new initiative that we launched in 2019. The plinth is a central element of the spur, which is what you're seeing here in the picture, which is almost like a European piazza. It's a gathering space at 30th Street and 10th Avenue. And when we were designing this space, we decided to make art the center of this incredible space by creating an art program of monumental new commissions that would take the center of this incredible stage. We've commissioned 2 majestic sculptures so far, and just in few weeks we will be installing this incredible sculpture that you're seeing on the screen by an artist called Pamela Rosenkrantz, who is a Swiss artist, and this is her first major public art commission in the States. The artwork is called Old Tree, and it's an amazing tree painted with this very beautiful and very intense hues of red and pink. And it's almost like a tree of life. It's a connection between heaven and earth, but it also reminds of the blood vessels of an organism, of an animal.
It does. It looks like capillaries.
Exactly.
And it looks like capillaries. It's so cool.
And also, I think it also talks about our relationship with nature on one side and artificiality on the other side, because of course it's a fake red tree in the middle of a beautiful park in your city. So we hope this artwork will generate lots of important conversations also about the environment and the park that we love so much. These are little pictures of tests that we've been doing. The artist has been doing. What you see on the left is a bonsai version of it. Of course, ours will be 20 feet high, so we're very excited about it. And yeah, I also want to tell you a little bit about what's coming up in the future of the piece, because this summer is one of the very busy summers, because we just started soliciting proposals for the future editions of the plinth. So we'll be sharing with our community and with you all about between 50 and 60 proposals for future commissions of the plinth by artists from all over the world who are working right now on designing incredible artworks for us.
Extraordinary. And tell me, when do you think the Pamela Rosencrantz, when are we going to see that? When will New Yorkers get a chance to see that?
So we will be installing in the second half of April. So it will be visible at the end of April. But of course, when we'll open the connection, and my colleagues will talk about it later, that will also be part of the celebrations for the opening of the Moynihan Connection.
Now, Melanie, New York, the High Line is the only park in New York City with a multimedia public art program that features films and video art. So I'm really interested in knowing what we have to look forward to on the High Line channels, and any upcoming opportunities for the public to meet any of the artists in the program.
Of course. So we, of course, are very lucky that we get to meet artists all the time, and they come and visit us, and we invite them for walks in the park. But it's especially wonderful events when we're able to share the artist's brilliance with all of the public. And so for anyone who's not familiar with High Line Channels, this is our multimedia program. So we show films and videos every day in the 14th Street Passage from dusk until the park closes. And so if you're walking through on your evening commute, or if you're out for a late stroll in the summer, you can always see brand new films and videos from incredible artists from around the world. And this program started in 2010. We've worked with many historical artists like John Cage or Merce Cunningham, and then also incredible contemporary artists like Mika Rottenberg or Laura Provost. And so what we have coming up in the spring is a really special opportunity. Yasmina Chibik is an artist originally from Slovenia, and she'll be flying in from London to do a talk about her program. And her exhibition is called Halls of Power. And she's someone who's interested in architecture and in dance and in literature and in opera, but in the ways that governments and different political parties are commissioning and thinking about how to make an identity around a group of people, either good or bad, around the way that they relate to culture. And so it's really exciting. Yeah, well, and so it's really exciting for us to think about this show on the High Line, which is such a fascinating piece of architecture and history all together. And so to invite an artist who's thinking about all of these interconnections, specifically from Yugoslavia and other European countries, but to bring that in conversation with the site of the High Line. And so stay tuned, May 16th, pencil in the date, you'll be able to come and hear the two of us get into more of these conversations.
No, thank you. But Cecilia, another question that I had is that the High Line has world-class gardens and plantings. We all know that. But I think that one of the questions that some folks have wrote in about is that how do artists engage with the High Line and its landscape?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. You know, we always start talking to the artists and we take them to the Highland. So for us, it's very important that the artists we invite to create a new commission think of the Highland as an inspiration. And sometimes, you know, they get inspired by the gardens, other times by the city surrounding us, other times by the people that come. But I wanted to share an upcoming project that we're very excited about by a Chinese artist called Yu Ji. Here you see her work at the 2019 Venice Biennale. She's an artist that combines both very kind of industrial material with very central shapes. And for the Highland, she was very interested in sort of rediscovering or re-engaging with the history of botanical ornamentation in architecture. So when a column ends with you know, when architecture includes elements taken from our horticultural world. And she has spent some time also with Richard. Here you can see a beautiful picture of the artist looking at the different plants on the highland, and decided to create a sculpture that would take into account the surroundings, in particular the plants and flowers that grow around her location. And she's making a sculpture that of course, you know, I cannot really show you lots of pictures because this is in progress. So these are sketches on one side and sort of prototype on the other, but are columns that include details of plants that are growing on the highline. And some of them will also include pieces of soap.
I was going to say, is that soap?
Yeah, so what you see here is an existing work that combines both cement and soap. So thinking about sort of the relationship between monumentality on one side and also the fragility of soap. So the sculpture will slightly change throughout time, but I mean, won't fall apart, I promise. But our community and friends are invited to come back every few months to see how the sculpture is changing.
I was walking on the High Line the other day and someone was looking at a sculpture and they said, no, I think this has always been here because it looks like it's always been there. But we all know that there's a lot of work that it takes in order to get something up onto the High Line. But I don't think some of our viewers this evening actually understand everything that happens in order to produce something onto the High Line. So could you just peel back the curtain a little bit for us and invite us to take a look at what that could be and the process?
I would love to. You know, that's an excellent question because we're very, very proud of being able to assist and support the artists in the realization of their wildest dreams. So you should know that artists are amazing creatures and they have fantastic ideas, but sometimes they don't necessarily know how to realize those ideas. And so when we work with artists, we offer not only a production budget, but also and moral support, but also technical support and production support. And here comes, you know, Jordan Benke, who is our production director, who basically works out of something like this. This was a sketch that we received of Mariam Benani, who is the artist that made this beautiful picture, this beautiful piece that is currently on the Highland. It's titled Windy. She's a filmmaker and she wanted to make her first public sculptures, but she had no idea how to realize it. But her idea was to create a spinning tornado, like one that you see in cartoons and movies, but she had really no idea. So my team worked very closely with her. Here you see some production pictures of Mariam and Jordan trying to troubleshoot and come up with an idea that would be respectful of the artist's first, you know, conception, but also that would last 12 months in the climate of New York City. And so here in this picture in the bottom right, you see Jordan came up with the engineer with this idea of having a pole, and what you see red are e-bike engines or motors. So they spin and they consume very little, and the whole sculpture spins almost exactly like a tornado, almost like a digital tornado, but in sculptural and analog form. So we're very proud of this. The work, as you can see, gets sometimes it gets craned on the Highline. This time we're lucky that it's in the elevator, so it gets pushed throughout the street and the garage, and then it finally makes it onto the Highline, and it's there until this May. So I hope you get the chance to see it if you haven't seen it yet.
And it's spectacular. Thank you. Melanie, I have a question. You don't know me that well yet because I just got here, but I love New York City history and I absolutely love architecture. So could you tell me how we engage artists, how you engage artists or ask artists to engage both with important moments in New York City history, but also the very changing landscape of New York City architecture?
Of course, Alan. I'm as Cecilia said, when we invite artists to do projects, they come up with incredible inspiration. They think about what you can see around the High Line, they think about the horticulture, they think about things that are invisible, but they're really using this platform to be able to connect with the city and all of these different realms of different kinds of histories. And so often they'll connect to something that's very local, but they'll also think about things that are important across the nation and important around the world. And I think Fahim Majid's piece is really one of the most incredible examples of that. And so the artwork that you're looking at right here is right now located next to Hudson Yards, next to the shed at 30th Street and 10th Avenue. You can see it up today if you're brave enough to go out in the cold. And this artwork is called Freedom Stand. And where the title comes from is the name of the first Black-owned newspaper in the United States, which was called Freedom's Journal. And then the design of it is kind of a merge between a historical newsstand and Dogon granaries from Mali. And he's putting together these images to think about how newspapers and how communities are able to speak for themselves. And so what you see if you come to visit the artwork is every month or every few weeks, depending on the wind and the rain, there are new newspapers that are on the sides of the sculpture. And so the images that you're seeing here are of the covers of newspapers and magazines owned by Black communities that were printed between 1828 and 2022. And it's so fascinating to come back and see this artwork change every couple of weeks. And it feels like you're reading history today. And so much of it is thinking about local community history, stories about kids graduating from high school or from junior high school, or beauty pageants, but also the history of civil rights and the history of elections, the history of assassinations in the United States, and so much the history of this entire place and the world, but told specifically through Black newspaper print.
And one of the things, Melanie, that I had heard just a few weeks ago when I was by this this particular piece was someone commenting on just how important local journalism was, and how little of it we have today, because so much of what we're reading is national, and these are so local stories. So when you read these broadsheets, it's really neat to see just how granular the stories are, and they really tell these stories of a different time, and all these interesting people. So thank you so much, Cecilia. Thank you, Melanie, for joining us today. We have so much to look forward to when it comes to art in 2023, and we're so grateful for you to spend part of your evening with us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
And now we're going to talk about another very incredible project coming to fruition in May, and that is the Moynihan Connector. And joining us for this section of tonight's program is the Highline Senior Director of Planning, Design, and Construction, Patrick Hazari, the Highline's Director of Horticulture, Richard Hayden, and Isabel Castilla, the Principal from James Corner Field Operations. Welcome, friends.
Thank you, Alan. Great to be here.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you here, and I'm excited to ask you some questions about the connector. And Patrick, you and I just had an incredible hard hat tour yesterday, and I left completely animated and very inspired by what I saw. And I would love for you to kick us off this evening by telling us a bit of the history of the connector and a little bit of the status of where we are right now in its progress.
Absolutely. Happy to do so, Alan, and happy to join everyone this evening. So everyone knows that the neighborhood around the High Line is constantly changing. And I think the area we can all agree has changed the most is the northern end, with the construction of Hudson Yards and Manhattan West. In 2019, we commissioned Diller Scofidio Renfro to study the far west side with a particular focus on pedestrian networks and connections to other public spaces at the northern end. And one study was advanced that looked at a connection between the High Line Spur and Manhattan West. And so just to orient everyone, the bottom left of the image is the High Line Spur, where the plinth is located that Cecilia spoke about. Then Manhattan West is the development just north at 31st Street. And what's really unique about Manhattan West is it's at the same elevation at the High Line. And so that really started the team to think about, could there be a connection, a bridge, a physical link between the High Line and Manhattan West? And so the study concluded with an L-shaped bridge that's shown here in the dashed green line. And that was really the initial idea and the starting point for the design. This was then modified to align with the priorities of the governor's office. And in the state of the state in January of 2021, the project was announced and there was full support from the governor's office, as well as Brookfield Properties. And so that really was the kickoff point for the project. The site conditions, I think we can all agree, we're very familiar with the congested condition both at 30th Street and Dyer Avenue. Dyer Avenue is the southernmost entrance to the Lincoln Tunnel, and so it isn't pedestrian focused. And so again, really trying to think about how to create a safe, comfortable path between Manhattan West and the High Line was the goal of the project. To really bring this vision to life, we engaged with SOM, an architecture firm, and James Corner Field Operations. I think everyone knows James Corner Field Operations led the design for the High Line. So really trying to leverage and think about the relationships that we have with our design team for the park, and extending it to the connector. And what they came up with was, really thinking of this concept of two bridges, but bringing some legibility to the design. The bridge along 30th Street, which you'll see here with the green and the brown, that is the piece of the bridge that is heavily planted. And then the counterpoint to that is the northern piece, the piece that runs over Dyer Avenue, that's much more architectural in its expression. So this next view shows you what this looks like in 3 dimensions. You really start to understand how the two bridges are brought to life in that space.
Wow, it looks like one of those old covered bridges that you'd see in New England.
Absolutely, that was one of the inspirations for the timber bridge, really trying to think about old bridges that use this truss structure to be built. The piece that's quite unique that you can really see in this rendering, Alan, the plantings here are quite lush, and we're really able to take advantage of the depth of the structure to bring a new palette to the High Line. And Isabel can speak a little bit more about how the team thought about this as they were developing the designs.
Yeah, and when you do it, Isabel, I'd love to hear about how this section's different than the other sections of the High Line as well.
Absolutely, that's a great question, Alan, and thank you for having me here to speak about this project. I think one of the things that makes the project very unique, as Patrick mentioned, is the sense of immersion that we're trying to create with the landscape. If you look at the bottom sketch on this image, you'll notice how all of the trees and planting are organized almost by height, by order, as we were organized when we were little kids in school, standing in line. And we're prioritizing the highest planting at either edges of the bridge, at either end, the eastern and the western end, with planting lowering towards the middle. And that is because we want to create a very unique immersive experience that is actually quite different from what you see on the High Line today. As Patrick mentioned, 30th Street is not the most exciting street, but we do have really cool corridors when you look all the way to the east and all the way to the west. So what we wanted to do was envelop the public into almost like a mini forest in the middle of Manhattan, but really by having these plantings organized by height, reinforce or open up those views as you're heading east or west along Manhattan. What facilitates that, as you see on the top set of the images, is the amount of soil that we're able to achieve in this project. Having worked on the High Line for more than 10 years, I'll tell you one of our biggest challenges is that we're always working with the existing bridge, which only allows us to have up to 18 inches of soil. So that in a way limits the type of plants and the types of densities and sizes of plants we're able to install. But having the opportunity to design this bridge from scratch, we were able to have a wish list of what we would like to have on this bridge that we never had on the High Line. And the wish list number one was to have a lot more soil. So when you see on these diagrams, all of this brown area is the amount of soil we have. We're able to achieve 4.5 feet of soil for our trees. The High Line only has 18 inches. And we're also able to have the soil be continuous from side to side of the structure, so that trees are not able to grow down, but their roots are able to expand sideways, allowing them to develop very healthily, but also allowing us to install very large specimens from day one, so that you do truly experience this concept of an immersive landscape. The other aspect we're very excited about is that The species that we have selected for this project have been very highly curated. They're all native species of North America, and they're all species that already occur on the highline. But we have collected them in this very short length of bridge to have a very fantastic seasonal experience throughout. In the spring, as you see on the image all the way on the left, we have collected a lot of flowering trees, including serviceberries, redbuds, and dogwoods, all of which will bloom at the same time. So we're going to have amazing colors as soon as it gets a little bit warm in the coming months. In the summer, all of the trees will be very lush, creating shade and providing a very comfortable experience as you walk through. But the understory will really thrive. We have a lot of textures composed of sedges, grasses, heucheras, and foam flowers, all of which will flower through the months of June and July and August and create a really rich texture under the canopy of trees. In the fall, we have also selected trees that have great fall color, including maples and black tupelos. Some of these are also planted on the spur, so we'll see a little bit of that effect from the spur traveling onto the bridge with these very rich fall colors. And lastly, in the winter, this is not a month that should sound boring to us in terms of horticulture. We also have carefully selected species that have great textures, including birches that we see on this image, juniper trees that will still keep some of the green, and also blood twig dogwoods, some of my favorites, which will bring a very red color to the space. And if we are lucky enough to have some snow, will really highlight the planting bed through the winter time.
So basically, no matter when we go to view this, it's going to be extraordinary.
It's going to be extraordinary. And as you see on this image, and we can all picture what 30th Street looks like today, here you're fully immersed in landscape, you're transversing to this bridge, enjoying the city, but in more sheltered space. And as you see on the very far side of this image, that also leads us to the timber bridge, that bridge that we were talking about, feels a little bit like those old school New England bridges. It kind of hooks on to this planted bridge, creating a threshold. And while we're not able to do a lot of planting here, because we are located over Dyer Avenue with very little sunlight, we are using that same sense of immersive experience by creating this timber bridge. So you are transversing the space through the trusses, and the trusses in turn create that sense of shelter, that sense of collection, while still having an amazing structure to look up to as you move through the space.
Really, I mean, really spectacular. I have a question. When did the project break ground? And what's construction been like?
So if you can believe it, Alan, it was only 1 year ago this month that the project broke ground. So there's been an incredible team that's been working for the past year to bring this project to life.
That's insane. That, like, for people watching, that doesn't happen, right? I mean, this is not a normal thing that takes place. We don't build something in a year. Yeah, it has happened on a very fast timeline. And just to show you some images from the past year, you know, we started with a groundbreaking event in February, quickly moved it to foundations with the erection of the steel by May. And then by June, the full structure was in place. And you really started to understand, you know, how the Woodland Bridge was coming together with these unique, what we call them, the steel arms that extend from either side of the structure and create that bathtub that Isabel was describing. And so here in the image on the right, you really understand and see that 4 to 5 feet of depth that can accommodate the trees that we were seeing in the renderings for the project. And that's really quite different than the Highline. And so a lot of the elements of the project were fabricated off-site, which made it easy to have everything be assembled on-site with these large panels coming to site, being craned into place, bolted and fastened, and then continuing to build out the structure. So it's been an incredible effort, and everything we're seeing here with the creation of the bathtub leads us to, I think, one of the most exciting aspects of the project, which is the planting, you know, filling the space with the soil. Exactly. Yes, and I want to bring Richard into the conversation, our chief horticulturalist. Richard, I mean, not an easy task. We have to care for all of these new plantings, and we're 30 feet above ground level. What is that like?
That's right, Alan. I'm so happy to be here with all of you tonight.
So glad we gave you an easy job, Richard.
Yeah. Well, and Isabel and her team have really designed a beautiful garden. It's going to be very emotionally evocative, the way that all of the High Line is. It's going to be a new experience with a very kind of Northeast woodland feeling. And of course, when it comes to taking care of the plants, we're so excited to actually have 4 feet of soil. So that's going to give us, there's a certain amount of insulation that's been built into the project, so we won't have quite so much drying out, so much cold to deal with in the winter. So we're very excited about that. We've had to go as far away as Ohio, upstate New York for some of the trees that we needed. And a lot of the plants were actually grown under contract at a nursery called the Plant Group in Connecticut, who incidentally grew all of the original plants for the High Line dating back to 2009. And fun fact, they actually told us that because of some of the unusual plants that were chosen for the project originally, we've introduced about 15 new species into the nursery trade that are kind of unique to the High Line. And people can come and see them, and they're ordering them, and the High Line's responsible for that.
Wow, really interesting. And Patrick, so tell us what's next in the construction process for us.
So the last piece of the project that will make its way to New York is the Timber Bridge. And so that is the piece over Dyer Avenue. That bridge is being fabricated in British Columbia. And we were able to see a mock-up of that last year. And that's what you see here, just one section of the bridge. And this was really in an effort to see how all the components and the pieces came together, the design team to really touch the material, make a few changes, and then release the fabricator to start making the bridge. We were just in Canada last week with the full team to check on the progress, to see the trucks being loaded up, to see this incredible—
Are those the pictures from Canada we're looking at right now?
Exactly. So these are each of the individual angled beams and top beams for the timber bridge. They're all coming to site across 4 different trips over the next 3 or 4 weeks, and then this will be assembled on site. It'll just be kind of a kit of parts that will be assembled on the street, and then the entire bridge will be craned into place over a long weekend in mid-March. And so we will make sure we tell everyone when that's happening. It would be cool to stop by and see this bridge be installed over Dyer Avenue, and really will be the second piece, the physical link between the Woodland Bridge and Manhattan West.
Now, my folks were very excited because they live on Long Island and they could take the train to Moynihan Train Hall, and now they can get directly on the High Line. But I'm also interested, could you talk to us a little bit about how this is going to change or impact the city?
I think it really, the only way to answer that question is thinking about the experience from the vantage point of a pedestrian. And we were able to put together this 60-minute clip or 60-second clip of your journey from Moynihan Train Hall through the public spaces of Manhattan West, which are largely built out. You know, as you approach the Whole Foods here, you turn left, and right where this blue signage is where the bridge will come in. This is the view from the other side, the piece that is built and in place, the Woodland Bridge, and you can start to see some of the plants that Isabel spoke about. The pathway here is a perforated corten material, so it allows rainwater to go through and be directed to the planting beds, similar to the pavers on the High Line. And this really will frame, you know, the plantings and the trees will frame your approach to the High Line spur. And it'll really have, I think, a really quite compelling vantage point to the plinth that will be on axis with the pathway here, and really make it a quite welcoming entrance to the High Line as you continue walking south, you know, to other parts of the High Line or maybe to Hudson Yards. But we're really excited about this new link and the way that it will connect to the High Line at this area.
It's also just completely dynamic, right? You step off, you come into the city in Moynihan Train Hall, and then you immediately can step onto here. You are hit with just why this is the greatest city in the world when you step on this connector. Now, we know that this was influenced by the buildings, and we just saw it around the connector. Richard, while we have you here, I'm really interested in knowing how the plantings have been affected on the High Line by all the buildings that have, the building that has taken place since we opened up a bunch of years ago.
That's a really good question, Alan. And if it wasn't challenging enough having 18 inches of soil and growing things 30 feet in the air, and having to pump up the water and take care of everything while somewhere around 8 million people pass by. Imagine suddenly, having all these beautiful buildings go up, but your plantings weren't necessarily chosen for that kind of exposure. So for instance, along 30th Street, we now have significantly more wind because of some of the buildings. We have more shade. So we're constantly having to respond. We were lucky to have Pete Odolf, our garden designer, here in June, and he gave us some great ideas for some areas where we've got extra shade going on. So we're constantly renovating, updating, and of course, as a horticulturalist, playing with plants is kind of my favorite thing to do. So we're happy to have the challenge.
Well, thank you. And I want to thank all of you for joining us here today on this segment of tonight's discussion. Really inspiring. We have a lot to look forward to. Patrick, one last question. Just remind us, when do we think we're going to be able to cut a ribbon-ish on the connector? And when will New Yorkers be able to walk on it?
So we're looking at late May for that to happen. So around Memorial Day. So we will keep everyone posted, but very excited to walk the space with you and you all here tonight.
Well, thank you, Patrick. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Isabel. Thank you all for joining us for this segment. We're going to transition just a bit and talk about the community. I said at the beginning, you are all part. This happened because of collective action, and collective action starts with community. And it was that dedication that allowed for the High Line to be created in the first place. What you may not realize, though, is that your impact extends well beyond the things that are happening on the High Line. In fact, your support provides a platform for local organizations and empowering neighbors to create a better and more livable New York City. And to speak more about this in our final segment, I have some very special guests. And so I'd like for you to join me in welcoming Preeti Sodhi, the Director of Community and Government Relations, Robert Sanfiz, the Executive Director of La Nacional and the Neighbors Council member, and Kymberli Smith, an exceptionally cool young woman who's a member of our High Line team and a Neighbors Council member. Welcome, friends.
Thank you.
It's good to see you.
And you.
Thanks so much,
Now,
Alan.
I've recently been learning more about our Neighbors Council and all the work they do to collaborate with our community and to reinvest locally. And so, Preeti, can you share more about our Neighbors Council, what it is, how it got started, and what you're up to?
Sure thing, Alan. Thanks so much. So we relaunched the Highlines Neighbors Council, which is our community advisory council, in 2021. It's a group of committed stakeholders like Kim and Robert who live, work, or study in our community, Chelsea and Hell's Kitchen, the West Side of Manhattan. The members of the Neighbors Council help us connect more deeply to our community and to center their needs, interests, and concerns to make sure that our programs have the greatest impact.
Great. And Robert and Kim, what's your favorite thing about being a member of the Neighbors Council?
Well, Alan, I'll start by saying, I've lived and I work just a few blocks away from the High Line. I've been here for 25 years.
Wow.
And I think a little bit when the High Line first came to be, a lot of us wondered whether it would become a place primarily for tourists. But what had become very apparent very early on, and really a pleasant surprise, is that the High Line in the end really is mostly for us. And by us, I mean those who consider this area home. And for me, nothing exemplifies that more than the High Line going out of their way to reach out to people like me who live here and work here to create a neighborhood council. And, what can I say? What is neighborhood outreach is something that's so appreciated by all of us that are on the council. Going out of your way to connect with us. The High Line truly values our opinions. It's not just, they're not just there doing a service they don't have to do. They incorporate what we think. And that's really important for people like me. And as someone who runs a much smaller nonprofit, I almost feel supported, like that High Line is there to lift my efforts up too on a much smaller scale. And finally, it's such a pleasant experience to come meet other people in my neighborhood. And I get a chance to meet some really wonderful people. And one of my absolute favorites is Kim. So I'm really glad that Kim is here.
Hey, Kim.
Hi, thank you all for having me tonight. I just want to quickly start by kind of going into a bit of what Robert said about how it did not, because I moved to New York right before I started high school and it was a transition. And now I'm in my senior year and I think back and I think of how the High Line was one of the first places in this city that felt like home to me. It was one of the first places that I came to after school in 9th grade when I didn't know how to make friends and things like that. And as a teen staff member and a neighbors council member, I've had so many wonderful opportunities to have a voice, and the neighbors council in particular has helped me be included and represented when it comes to decision making for the High Line. And I've learned so much about civic engagement and how nonprofits serve communities, which I can bring with me as I start my career. I always say I'm one of the luckiest kids in the world to get to do something like this, and I completely and utterly mean it. I didn't know that places with such high stature and standing as the High Line would do something that's so imperative to small parts of the community and care about what each and every kid has to say. And the High Line is so important to me because it isn't just trying to have partnerships with big names, but it cares about every single person who's ever stepped foot on it. And I've learned so much about New York and how New Yorkers look out for each other and how I can take so many of these qualities that I've learned to help me out as not only someone who is going to college soon, but being a person. I've become a better person since starting to work for the High Line and since being on the Neighbors Council. You meet so many wonderful people. Like, I didn't know that La Nacional existed, and now I love it so much there. We would meet there for meetings. I walk past all the time and say hi to Robert. I always tell my friends that I know him, and it feels cool because we walk to the 2 train and I'm like, oh, I know that guy. And I see so many people in the community now that I know I have an understanding with, and I know that we care about the same things. And it's just been so wonderful.
Now, Kim, stay with me for a second because you also mentioned you're a member of our Highline Teen Program. And what some of you know, and because you've helped fund it, we run an exceptionally wonderful Highline Teen Program that has doubled the amount of young people who are both getting leadership development, but also paid employment. And it also focuses on kids who live, work, and play in our neighborhood. And you've been a member of that, of the Highline Teens, and I'm really interested in you telling our viewers this evening about what you've been up to as a member of the Highline Teen Program.
Yeah, of course. So as a member of the Highline Teen Program, I have gotten to work in many different sectors of this place we call home. So working at the Highline redefined my definition of what I thought that work was before I started going to high school. I essentially get paid to learn and grow as a person while developing these professional skills that I've learned are transferable no matter where I'm going or what I'm doing. And I was just so happy to obtain a job when I first started working here, and I had no idea how much I would learn and come to love about New York just because of the High Line. I'm not only here when I'm working, I'm here on the weekends with my friends. Every time family visits from Georgia, the High Line is the first place that I take them because it just means so much to me.
Where I take my family too when they come into the city.
Exactly. It's like the perfect first stop.
100%, yes.
I've been able to work with partners like The Shed, where I got to give tours on an exhibition by Tomas Saraceno about climate change through the world of spiders. It was absolutely amazing. And then we threw an event there, and it was the biggest event the teen staff has done to date, raising awareness about climate change through different lenses. And then, like I said earlier, La Nacional served as like a community hub for the teens last year. And that's how I met Robert and how I met all these different groups of people who spend time there. And I learned that it's actually my principal's favorite restaurant, which is so cool. And I get to like engage with the community. On the council, I was the Neighbors Council resident over the summer. And if you know anything at all about me, you know I like to talk. I'm a people person, and I got to meet so many people. And I just have always felt so welcomed. And being able to do things like senior fit classes and volunteer at bingo is like things that I would absolutely pay to do if I didn't have a program like this. These are things that I would spend my weekend trying to find coupon codes to do, and I get to do them and develop professional skills while I'm at it. And it is honestly, I say this to my friends all the time, I just I could not possibly be more thankful, because as a teenager, I think this is the coolest job that one could possibly have. And I am so excited to continue doing it this year.
And we're so proud of you, Kim. We're so glad that you're part of us and you speak so eloquently about the program and about the work and what it's meant to you, that it's hard not to get animated. I have a question though. You're all part of the Neighbors Council. There's lots that you've been up to in 2022. What are you most proud of that happened in the past year? Preeti, why don't you start?
Sure. Well, for me, I think, and maybe Kim and Robert can jump in, but I think working on our Neighbor to Neighbor Fund for the second year in a row has been really exciting. The Neighbor to Neighbor Fund, to give some more context, is our participatory grant making program that the Neighbors Council runs. As part of this process, the council added to a community asset map, which will be added to the screen shortly. It's a tool that allows us to explore our community's most valued and loved assets, including neighborhood organizations, parks, businesses, public art. You can see here some of our Neighbors Council members meeting and working on the map. It was just a really awesome way to learn about our shared histories and what was important to us as community members. The map was created in collaboration with one of our teaching artists at the Highline, Cynthia Chen. So it was really tactile and it was something you could touch and feel as we were having these conversations. And I think it was just a really, really exciting way to work with the Neighbors Council. Like, they were our true collaborators. They're our gateway to our immediate community. And it was a great thing to collaborate on.
And that's the asset map that everybody's looking at right now, right?
Yeah, that's there, right there. And it shows like our immediate community and different places are important to us in community. And you can see Robert in the center of the photo, very excited about something he's added to the map.
Yeah.
Now, who did the council wind up selecting for grants in 2022? And how did the community asset map help with that process?
Well, you're right. I do look particularly excited, but I have to say, if you came in that day and you saw this 10 by 10 map sitting there, we were ready to attack it. And Cynthia Chen just did such a beautiful job, and it really helped us identify what we thought were, important assets in our community, especially for the priorities of, supporting youth or access to the arts and culture or job trainings. And I have to say that it was pretty amazing to see people who have been involved in the neighborhood, have lived here 50 years, and, see what their opinions were compared to those who are just young students who might have just started with us for the past 6 months. And that map being there really helped us come together with some really great causes. And in the end, we picked 2 really worthy ones.
Yeah, we awarded 2 grants in 2022. The first grant that we awarded was to the New Victory Theater, which is New York City's first and only performing arts theater for kids, their families, and their classmates. The Neighbors Council awarded a grant to New Victory Theater to support their new 42nd Youth Corps. The Youth Corps provides job training, mentorship, career guidance to young adults from across New York City. The program is providing more than 75 hours of paid development opportunities to NYC youth this year. And a fun fact, one of our Neighbors Council members, Haishim, who grew up in the neighborhood, went through the program and they loved it. With this grant, I'm really excited about working with New Victory to connect our local community to the opportunity of the Youth Corps program. And again, want to highlight that they were selected because the council identified arts and culture and access to workforce development as priorities. And so by identifying that, we were able to provide some options and they voted on New Victory. The mapping exercise also helped us to recognize that food insecurity continues to be a major issue in our community. Because of this, the council awarded a Neighbor to Neighbor grant to Holy Apostles Soup Kitchen to build upon the Highline's long-standing relationship with the organization. Located in the heart of Chelsea, the Soup Kitchen provides meals, social services support, and workshops that help those in need toward improved health, housing, and jobs.
And so what are you looking forward to in 2023?
Well, I personally would like to see the Neighbor to Neighbor Fund that we've been working on get larger, and maybe we can give out more money to worthy causes. And to give you an idea just how diverse our role is on the neighborhood council, we were also asked to be part of a kind of a community advisory committee for the Moynihan Connector. So obviously all of us were really happy to see it come to life, and we can't wait to see the High Line grow in that respect as well.
I personally am just looking forward to more of these conversations. I don't know if anyone saw, but a few photos back, there's a photo where I'm kind of off to the side and I'm just like this, looking at two other council members. And I'm like that every meeting because there's just so much that I learned. There's so much that is imparted on me as a teenager. And I've been put in a position where I get to look at and figure out what this city needs and think about how I can help with that as I become an adult.
No, I think so too. And Robert, you know, one of the ways I think we can try to expand the amount of money in the pool is by taking our donation boxes in the High Line that we have in some of the kiosks and raising money for the Neighbors Fund in those boxes to help double it. And that's something we're going to spend some time thinking about as we approach the beginning of our busy season here on the High Line. You know, so many organizations talk about community engagement. They talk about bringing people involved, and it's sort of like a one and out. They don't live their values consistently. And the thing that has made me so impressed about what we have been doing as an organization is all of you, and you're sticking with it. It's consistent, it's paying off, and your voices really are part of the DNA of this organization. I am thrilled to be in conversation with you today and very, very grateful for all you do to make the High Line one of the coolest and best places in New York City. So Robert, Preeti, Kim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
And I want to thank all of our panelists today for joining us. And if we have any questions, I'd be delighted to answer them.
Yes, and I am going to be looking at our questions and kind of passing them along to you. We've got a great group of questions. One viewer is asking, Alan, what do you want to focus on in the first year or two as executive director?
I think for me, one of the things I'm very interested in focusing on is having the High Line consistently be a place where people feel like they belong. Not just that they're welcome here, but really that this is a place where they feel like they belong, and thinking about what that means. And, you know, as part of it is that when we look at our food concessions, for example, some of the things we're selling on the High Line are just out of reach for some of our neighbors. And so I'm just wondering, like, when we walk onto the High Line and we have to buy an $8 bottle of water, or there's a $20 taco, just as an example, like, do you feel like this place is for you? And I think we still can have that, but we also have to have some price points on the High Line that are accessible to everybody else. That's one of the things that I'm really interested in thinking about. I also love horticulture. And I think that horticulture has to be lifted up as a program. And so over the course of the next year, we're going to be asking horticulture to create programming for our community. That's where this began. It began with horticulture, and I want to make sure that we lift that voice up and it becomes as prominent as possible. And so this year, we're going to see a celebration of indigenous plants onto the High Line. And then I'm also going to be exploring just how successful we've been with the connector, and then maybe thinking about how we connect the High Line even farther, maybe around to the Javits Center, and what that could look like for us in the Western Rail Yard. So that's something that I'm going to be spending a lot of time in community with people, talking about the pros and the cons. But when we make that decision, I want New Yorkers to know, and our neighbors to know, it has to follow program. First comes program, and then comes form. And so we first want to say, if we had more real estate, what would we do there, right? And then figure out whether or not it makes sense or if it's even doable. But I actually think it's something that's worth discussing, and I'm excited to be spending some time with it.
I'm looking forward to continuing that conversation. Speaking of horticulture, we have a couple of questions around horticulture. So perhaps also Richard and Isabel and Patrick might want to chime into this. So someone is asking, how many new trees are you planning to introduce to New York City through the connector plantings? And also, are you planting fully mature trees?
I'm
I
happy
can
to
answer
take
the
that
question.
one.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
We're
Go
both
ahead,
so
Isabel.
passionate. We both want to talk about it. So I don't have the full numbers off the top of my head, but I think we're planting over 60 new trees on the connector. And then we also have shrubs that are not in that number, and a number of perennials and vines. And they range in sizes to be able to accomplish the concept we have, but also to make sure that they're planted and can develop very healthy. We have some trees that are rather large, and perhaps the largest ones we've ever planted on the High Line. We have some 6-inch caliper maple trees, which to put it in perspective, the root ball is as, if I were to lie down next to the root ball, is as long as I am. I'm 5 feet tall. So very, very large trees, but then also we have medium-sized trees and small trees. I think Richard can speak to this, but horticulture is all about planting plants in a location where they can develop in a healthy way. So those larger trees are in the larger areas of the connector, and then smaller ones in the tighter areas so they can continue to develop within their new environment.
Richard says it's perfect. Adding nothing. Thank you for jumping in, Isabel. Any more questions, Preeti?
Yeah, we have a question actually for Kim. Someone watching says, Kim, so impressive that you are a teen. What are your plans for college and beyond?
Yes, that's what I wanted to know too, Kim, but I didn't want to ask you because I didn't want you to feel the pressure. But now that somebody else asked, why don't you answer?
Oh my goodness, that is so kind. Thank you so much, Mary. So in terms of college, I applied to 23 schools and have not gotten all of them back yet because I intend to major in performing arts. I'd like to be an actress. So ideally, I'd like to double major at a small liberal arts college in English literature and theater. And then going forward, I just want to tell stories. I want to be a storyteller and hopefully stay in New York and get to come back to the High Line all the time and see all my friends who work here as well. But I really would like to go to college for English and literature. So thank you for asking that.
You have a growing fan base here, Kim, so I think I think you're going to be pretty well set up after you graduate.
Thanks, Alan.
We have one last question for you, Alan. Do your kids like being on the High Line? What do they like doing on the High Line?
Well, you know, it changes. So when they were real, I have 2 boys, an 11-year-old named Ethan and an 8-year-old named Patrick. When they were very young, they loved the von Furstenberg sun deck because they have the water feature. And so as you can imagine, I could sit down on the wooden chaise lounge chairs and the kids take their shoes off, or they're wearing those native shoes and they're jumping up and down in the water and splashing about, and it was perfect and they loved it. Now they really love the art. And I think they just love seeing how it constantly changes. And one of the things I want to do actually is I want to create a scavenger hunt for young people. I want to make the place really accessible to young people. So one of the things I want to do is we have descriptions of the art, but they're for like adults. And I want to make another set, maybe on a new app, where the kids can sort of take a look at it and they can have something that speaks to them and that talks to them. Doesn't dumb it down, but really contextualizes it for them as well. And then also, I want to do a scavenger hunt of sorts so that they can arrive at any one of our entrances with a map and sort of check off all the different things that they see. And I've seen this done in other places, and I think doing it on the High Line would be exceptionally cool, and would also get more families and young people up onto the High Line. I also, by the way, really want to make sure that the High Line looks like New York, right? It doesn't always look like New York. It did when we reopened right after the pandemic, but I really want to make sure that when you're on the High Line, it literally looks like the beautiful mosaic that is our city. And that's going to be a goal for me too. And it's going to animate a lot of the decisions that we make. And as we come to a close on this evening, you know, this really is about people, it's about possibilities, and it's about dreaming big. That's what the High Line was built around. people's possibilities and dreaming big. And that's what we're going to do. Our best days are still ahead of us, and there's a Highline 2.0 and a next chapter yet to be written. And that's all of our job, is to figure out what that looks like. And I'm just, once again, so excited to be leading Friends of the Highline, excited to be in community with all of you, and grateful that you've joined us for this evening's presentation. So thank you. And have a good night.